18%. That is how much shorter a young seedling grows, on average, if you do one specific thing to it for 30 seconds a day. Starting the moment its first true leaves appear. Not a different soil, not a stronger light, not a heat mat, a humidity dome, or a fancy seed starting mix. In one university trial, that same simple action cut plant height by 22 to 25% in one common bedding plant, 18% in another, and 44% in a third, while making every one of them thicker, sturdier, and far less likely to snap the first time real wind hit them outdoors. If you've ever started seeds inside and ended up with tall, pale, floppy stems that couldn't stand up on their own by the time you moved them outside, this is almost certainly the piece you were missing, and it costs nothing. My name's Volter. I've started seedlings indoors on this farm for years, hundreds of trays a season, and for a long time I made the exact mistake most people make. I assumed a leggy, weak seedling was a light problem. Buy a stronger bulb. Move the tray closer to the window. Add a heat mat. None of that was wrong exactly, but none of it was the actual answer either. And once I found the real one, my seedlings stopped looking like something I had to nurse along and started looking like something that was going to survive being planted outside. Here's the rule, and it's the one thing I want you to understand before anything else, because it explains every other piece of advice I'm about to give you. A seedling growing on a windowsill or under a grow light is living in a world with no wind, no rain, and nothing brushing past it. Outside, in the world that plant actually evolved for, every one of those things happens constantly, and the plant reads that mechanical contact as information. It's not decoration. It's a signal telling the plant what kind of environment it needs to be built for. A seedling that never feels a breeze has no reason to invest energy into a thick, tough stem, so it doesn't. It puts everything into height instead, racing upward toward the light as fast as it can. Because in the total absence of any mechanical signal, height is the only survival strategy the plant has access to. That's why indoor seedlings, even under excellent light, so often end up tall, thin, and floppy. It's not a light problem at its root. It's a missing wind problem. There's an actual name for this response, thigmomorphogenesis, and I'll be honest, it's not a word I'd bother using around the barn, but it's worth knowing because it's genuinely well studied, not folk wisdom dressed up to sound clever. When a plant stem is touched, brushed, bent, or moved repeatedly, it triggers a real physiological cascade inside the plant. Calcium ions moving through specialized channels in the cell membrane, followed by a shift in hormone production, ethylene specifically, that tells the plant to stop pouring energy into vertical stretch and start reinforcing what it's already got. The stem gets shorter than it otherwise would have, and at the same time meaningfully thicker with reinforced cell walls that make it measurably stronger and more resistant to snapping or bending. This isn't a theory I'm repeating secondhand from somewhere online. Commercial greenhouse growers have used exactly this mechanism for decades to control the height and quality of the ornamental and vegetable transplants they sell, because a compact, sturdy plant is worth more at market than a tall, floppy one, and because it lets growers fit more plants into the same greenhouse space without needing to reach for a chemical growth regulator to keep them short. Researchers measuring the actual stems afterward found the treated plants had genuinely higher shear strength and a higher modulus of rupture, meaning it takes measurably more force to bend or snap them than an untouched plant of the same age, which is exactly the quality you want in something that's about to get handled, transplanted, and left outside to fend for itself. So here's what I actually do, and it takes less time out of my day than most people spend deciding what to have for breakfast. The first stage starts the moment your seedlings break the surface of the soil before they've even opened their first true leaves. At this point, they're too delicate to touch directly, so what I do is simply jiggle the tray itself. Pick it up, give it a gentle shake, side to side, just enough that the tiny stems sway and quiver for a second or two, then set it back down. 30 seconds, once or twice a day, is plenty. You're not trying to stress the plant. You're trying to introduce the first hint of movement into an environment that would otherwise be dead still. Once the first true leaves appear, usually somewhere around a week or two after germination, depending on what you're growing, this is where moving air becomes the main event. Because at this stage, direct touching is still a bit much for a plant that's young and can do more harm than good. A small fan pointed at your seedling trays, running for a few hours a day, or even running continuously on a low setting, does the job beautifully. You're not trying to blast them flat against the tray, and if you notice stems bending hard sideways or seedlings struggling to stand back up between gusts, that's a sign to back the fan off a notch. Either move it further away or drop it to a lower speed. What you're aiming for is a gentle, constant stir in the air, the kind of breeze that makes the leaves flutter slightly, without ever really battering the plant. If you don't have a spare fan to dedicate to this, a piece of stiff cardboard or a folded newspaper fanned across the tray by hand for a minute or two or three times a day, does something similar. It's just more hands-on effort for you instead of letting a motor do the work continuously. As the seedlings grow taller and their stems thicken past that first fragile stage, you can add direct contact on top of the moving air. And this is the part people find almost too simple to believe actually does anything. Run your open palm gently across the tops of the seedlings, brushing the leaves and the very tips of the stems back and forth for 20 or 30 seconds. Some growers use a soft item instead of a bare hand, a strip of burlap, a feather duster, anything with a little texture that makes light contact without crushing or bruising the stem. In actual research trials, brushing treatments like this reduce plant height in aster seedlings by 22 to 25%, in Dusty Miller by 18%, and in Petunia by as much as 44%, compared to seedlings left completely undisturbed. And in every case, the brush plants weren't just shorter, they were noticeably tougher, better able to handle rough handling during transplanting without snapping. Consistency matters more than intensity here. And this is where I see people go wrong once they hear about this and get excited to try it. Once a day, gently, every single day, from the true leaf stage until you move your seedlings outside, will do far more than one aggressive session followed by days of nothing. The plant is responding to a pattern, a repeated signal that tells it what kind of world it's growing into, not to a single dramatic event. Skip a few days here and there, and you won't undo the progress, but treat it like a once-a-week chore instead of a daily habit, and you'll barely see the effect at all. I want to be straight about the limits of this too, because I'm not going to oversell it past what it actually does. This isn't a substitute for good light. A seedling starved for light will still stretch and go leggy, no matter how much you brush it or fan it, because in that case, the plant is chasing a genuine light deficit, not just responding to the absence of wind. And mechanical stimulation alone won't fix a lighting problem underneath it. It's also not a substitute for proper watering, good airflow to prevent fungal issues like damping off, or giving your seedlings enough room in the tray that they're not competing hard with their neighbors for space and light. Think of this as one layer sitting on top of everything else you're already doing right, not a replacement for any of it. Get the light right, get the watering right, and then add this on top. And that's when you'll actually see the difference in how your seedlings hold up. Not every seedling reacts to this the same amount, and it's worth knowing where to focus your effort if you're only starting a few trays. Tomatoes and peppers respond to this dramatically. They're notorious for going leggy indoors, and they're also some of the most responsive plants to mechanical stimulation in the actual research. So if you only add this routine to one part of your seed starting setup, put it there first. Squash and cucumbers respond well too, and their thick stems make the brushing stage especially easy to do without worrying about damaging anything. Fast-growing greens like lettuce and brassicas benefit less dramatically, mostly because they're usually in the tray for such a short window before transplanting that there's less time for the effect to build up, though a little daily airflow still won't hurt them. If you're short on time and running a full windowsill of different starts, prioritize whatever you're growing that normally gives you the leggiest, floppiest results. That's almost always where this makes the most visible difference. I'll also flag the mistakes I made early on because they're easy to repeat if nobody warns you about them first. The biggest one is starting too rough, too soon, treating a week-old seedling with the same firm brushing you'd use on a 5-week-old one. Young tissue bruises easily, and a bruised stem is an open door for the fungal problems that cause damping off. So gentleness in those first couple of weeks isn't optional. It's the difference between building a stronger plant and damaging a fragile one. The second mistake is inconsistency, doing it enthusiastically for 3 days, and then forgetting about it for a week, which barely registers with the plant at all, since the response depends on a repeated, patterned signal rather than an occasional one. And the third is confusing this with simply moving the tray to a different spot once in a while. Relocating a tray doesn't create the kind of repeated mechanical contact that triggers the response. The plant needs the actual touch or airflow, not just a change of scenery. None of these are hard to avoid once you know they're there, and knowing them ahead of time will save you a tray or two of trial and error. Here's why this matters more than people realize once transplant day actually arrives. A tall, thin, never-touched seedling has spent its entire short life in a perfectly still, sheltered environment, and the very first afternoon you set it outside, it gets hit with real wind, real sun intensity, real temperature swings all at once, with zero preparation for any of it. That's a genuine shock to the plant, and it's a big part of why so many home-started seedlings sit there stunted and sulking for a week or two after transplanting, or snap clean off at the base in the first stiff breeze. A seedling that's already been getting a daily dose of simulated wind for weeks walks into that same transition already built for it. The stem is already thicker, the tissue is already tougher. It's not experiencing outdoor conditions for the first time on the worst possible day. It's already been training for exactly that. There's a second benefit tucked inside this that most people never even ask about, and it's worth mentioning because it changes how much room you actually need on a windowsill or under a light. A shorter, more compact seedling takes up less vertical space, which means you can run your lights closer to the tray without scorching the tops. and it means you're not fighting the awkward problem of seedlings getting too tall for your setup 2 weeks before you're actually ready to plant them outside. I used to have seedlings bumping into my grow light fixture by the time the ground outside was finally workable. That almost never happens anymore. If you want to actually see this for yourself, rather than just take my word for it, run a simple side-by-side test, and it costs you nothing but a little patience. Start 2 trays of the exact same seed, same soil, same light, same watering schedule at the same time. Leave one completely untouched for the entire indoor growing period. Give the other the daily jiggle, then fan, then gentle brushing routine I just walked through. By the time you're ready to transplant, set them side by side and look at the stems. You'll see the difference before you ever measure a single thing. One tray will be visibly taller and thinner, the other noticeably shorter, thicker at the base, and standing up straighter on its own without leaning on anything. If you want to go a step further, measure the height of a few seedlings from each tray with a ruler right at the soil line, and weigh a few stems side by side. If you got a kitchen scale handy, the treated ones will typically come in shorter but heavier for their height, which is exactly the trade-off you're aiming for. Less reaching upward, more built into the base. Let's talk about what this actually costs, because I think that's part of why it surprises people. A small clip-on fan, the kind sold for desks or cooling a laptop, runs somewhere around $10 to $15, and it'll last through years of seed starting seasons if you take care of it. A feather duster, if you rather use one for the brushing stage than your bare hand, costs a few dollars at any hardware or department store, and a strip of burlap costs next to nothing if you got an old feed sack or landscaping fabric lying around already. Compare that to a second grow light fixture, a heat mat, or a bag of specialty seed starting mix, and it's not close. This is, without question, the cheapest single upgrade you can make to how your indoor seedlings turn out. And unlike a lot of gardening advice, it doesn't ask you to buy anything you don't already have sitting in a drawer somewhere. One last practical note, because I know somebody's going to ask about timing relative to hardening off. The process of gradually exposing seedlings to real outdoor sun and wind in the days before transplanting. This daily mechanical stimulation isn't a replacement for that step either, but it makes that final week noticeably less brutal on the plant. Seedlings that have already been handling simulated wind for weeks tend to sail through hardening off with far less of the wilting, scorching, and setback that undisturbed seedlings often show the first time they're actually set outside in real sun and real air movement. You're not skipping a step. You're just making every step after this one easier on the plant because it's not meeting mechanical stress for the very first time on the day it matters most. So here's the whole system laid out plainly from seed to transplant. Once your seeds break the surface, before true leaves appear, gently jiggle the tray once or twice a day for a few seconds each time. Once true leaves show up, add a small fan running for a few hours daily, or hand fan the trays a couple of times a day if you don't have one to spare, keeping the air moving gently rather than blasting the seedlings flat. Once the stems have thickened past that early fragile stage, layer in a daily gentle brushing with an open hand or something soft 20 to 30 seconds across the tops of the trays every single day without skipping, right up until it's time to move them outside. None of it costs anything beyond the time you're already spending checking on your trays each day, and none of it requires a single piece of new equipment beyond a fan you likely already own. What you end up with by transplant day isn't just a shorter plant. It's a plant that's already spent weeks learning how to stand up for itself, and that difference shows up exactly when it matters most, the first real week outside, when every other seedling on the block is getting knocked around by wind and sun. It's never felt before, and yours is already built for it. It's a strange thing to sit with, honestly, that the piece missing for most people's seed starting setup isn't a tool at all. It's a sensation, the plant simply needing to feel something brush past it, the way it would have felt a breeze or a raindrop or a curious animal walking through a field. Nobody's selling that. There's no product for it, no fixture, no bag with instructions printed on the side, which might be exactly why so few people ever hear about it in the first place. It's just a hand moving gently across a tray of seedlings for 30 seconds a day, and a plant that grows up already knowing what kind of world it's about to be planted into.